Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the last part of me cleaning up a directory on my external hard drive that I should have done a long time ago. This is completely wearing me out. The NVMe's that I put into my workstation, the original one from there, putting in my laptop, the HP Spectre x360. I think I changed the thermal compound. I don't know, I haven't edited this video yet. This is probably going to be the last one. I've been doing this for so long. Laptop upgrades, you know, enjoy. Today we have my HP Spectre x360. So this laptop here has been amazing from day one. I don't remember if it came with Windows 10 Home or Windows 10 Pro. I put Linux on it right out of the box. I didn't even set up Windows. And not that there's anything wrong with the laptop, but I noticed that when I had a few tabs open and if I was researching something, watching YouTube videos and stuff, the fan would kick on really, really loud. And it would just go like it was like a plane taken off in this thing. And at the time, my main computer was an MSI Leopard Pro gaming laptop. And in that laptop, I had just changed thermal compound to Arctic Silver 5. And I bought a new NVMe drive for it. So the old NVMe from the MSI Leopard Pro I had no use for, so why not throw it in this upgrade? This thing came with a 128 gigabyte SATA, so significantly slower. It's like 6 times slower. So I figured, why not do the same upgrade? So I upgraded the thermal compound and the NVMe on my MSI Leopard Pro. So with this one, I upgraded the thermal compound to Arctic Silver 5, and then I swapped out the SATA for an NVMe, and there was a huge performance increase. The boot time on it is unbelievable. I think it's like less than 10 seconds from completely off to at the desktop. And with the thermals, the fan barely kicks on. However, that was probably a little bit over a year ago when I did that. It's still running strong, there's no issues, but we're in quarantine, so we have nothing else to do. Let's upgrade it again. So we're gonna be changing the NVMe that I put in here, which is just an OEM drive, so it's nothing special. It's a Samsung something NVMe, 256 gigabyte. So we're gonna be swapping it out for an ADATA XPG SX8200. And then as for the thermal compound, we're going to change that again since we're in there, and we're going to change it with Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut this time. So already as it is, this laptop is very fast for what I need it for. So that's about 10 seconds. So it's nothing crazy or whatever, but before we start this, I'm going to run some benchmarks on Geekbench just to get a reading of temperatures and performance on the CPU as it sits right now, and then we're going to boot into a live USB so that way we can do a full benchmark test on the NVMe that's in here, because if we try and run a benchmark as the boot drive, we won't be able to get a write speed, which is the biggest thing between an OEM drive and running an aftermarket gaming drive, is the write speeds are significantly faster. So without too much dicking around, let's get into this. We have downloaded the latest Geekbench 5.1.1, so now we can change directory to downloads. So now we're in the downloads folder, and now what we want to do is extract this. So we're going to do tar-zxvf space, and now we're going to type in the name of the files. That's geekbench-5.1.linux.targz. So now it's extracted that, and now we can change directory to that folder. So we can just drag that over. And now that we're in this folder, all we have to do to run this is /geekbench_x86_64. There we go. So now we can go to this link here if we just want to view the results, or we can go to this one here if we want to add that to our profile. So I'm just going to copy that link, Control-Shift-C to copy in terminal. And there we go, those are our results. And I've signed in now, so this is added to my account, so we can come back to this after the modifications. I don't think it's really going to be a huge improvement, if any. It's mostly just going to be the temperatures. I'm just installing LM sensors right now so we can get some temperatures. So I'm just going to clear this. Okay, there we go. So now we have an active reading, I hope. Yes, okay, so it's updating. So we have an active reading of our temperatures. So now we can just run this benchmark again, and we'll keep an eye on those temperatures there. So the main ones that we want to look at here is the package, and we're at 58 degrees because this computer doesn't have dedicated graphics. So the main thing that we're going to be doing here is just trying to improve the CPU temperature. This is well within reason here. We're running HTOP in the bottom right corner there, just to show the usage. So you can see right here that the CPU is at 100%. Package is fluctuating a little bit there, so we have 68 degrees, 70, 76. Somehow we're at 103% CPU usage, 83 degrees on the CPU, 611% usage on the CPU, huh? It's definitely having some calculation issues because it's going for every thread. Because there's 8 threads, 800% would end up being all 8 threads at 100% usage. Oh, the fan just turned on. So I'm going to add that to my account. Okay, so that is added to my account now. So now you can see here that these top 2 benchmarks that we just did. So now let's run another just before this is able to cool down. Just want to run that again. And we are still at 62 degrees on the CPU. So at this point we should see some thermal throttling, if there is any. And this laptop is designed to thermal throttle at 100 degrees Celsius, which is excessively hot, especially for a laptop. So this laptop seems to handle single core performance without breaking a sweat. It's that multi-core test that really puts this thing to the test. Okay, so that's the last one there. And that is our next test result. So let's see how we did. I'm just gonna boot from the live USB for Pop! OS. Just gonna close that. Now we can go to disks, and we're gonna pick this. We're gonna pick our main partition, and we're gonna run a benchmark. Start benchmark. Okay, so that's the first one. So we got 2.8 gigabyte per second, and then 400 megabyte per second write. Start it again, 1.9 gigabyte per second, and then again 400 megabyte per second write, and we're gonna run it a third time. 1.9 gigabyte per second and 400-ish megabyte per second write. So that is our baseline. So now we can begin the fun process of installing this guy, ADATA XPG SX8200, and we're gonna change the thermal compound with Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut. Now before we dive into this, I'm just going to show you, I dug out the original mSATA. So this is actually a SanDisk X400. So this is actually a really good, reputable M.2 SATA drive. It does have the 2 notches. This is mSATA. So this is the same as a regular SSD. So I just so happen to have another SanDisk X400. This drive here and this one here would essentially be the same speed. So that's the benefit of NVMe over this, and that's why I did the upgrade. I didn't need to. That was more than acceptable for what I was doing with this laptop, but I had it from the old laptop anyway, so I just tossed it in. As for tools, I'm just using a precision screwdriver kit from Amazon Basic. Comes with a whole bunch of stuff, like all of the tools that you need here. So this is the thermal compound that is currently in this laptop, so we're gonna be cleaning that off and we're gonna be switching it. So now the first thing we wanna do is get a Torx bit for these 2 screws right here. So these are going to be a Torx 5. Now, this side here, we need to take this rubber foot off. Try and get under there. There we are. And I'll just stick that there so we don't lose it. Now we need Phillips. So I'm using a Phillips 0. Now keep in mind that these 2 outside ones are longer, the inside ones are shorter. So this right here is an outside one, this one here is an inside one. And that's it. Now we can just lift up from the middle. And there we are. First thing we want to do here is actually disconnect the battery. So I'm just going to try and get this out. There we go. So the battery is now disconnected, so now there's no power going to anything. I'm just going to hit the power button, make sure there's nothing left in any capacitors. Right here is the NVMe, and then over here you can see this is a PM961. So this is a Samsung 960 series NVMe. So relatively new. However, this is an OEM drive, so it's not very fast. So you can take this out. So we can see here that we have the NVMe on the left, the mSATA on the right, and mSATA can be identified by having that little notch. So if it goes straight across, you have a fast one. If it has the 2 notches, you have a slow one. So if you're going to be upgrading your computer, you have to make sure that this port right here, even though this is a standard M.2 connector, you have to make sure that this is PCI Express compatible. Otherwise, you're just going to be running expensive drives at slow speeds for no reason. And then there's also Gen 2, 3, 4. So you also have to look that up so you're not spending excessive amounts of money on drives that you're not going to need. So now I believe we actually have to take the battery completely out because the thermal compound goes on the CPU, which is on the back of the motherboard or the top. So we have to get to the complete other side of the motherboard. 2 screws over here. Okay, now we have this little cable right here, and these just pry up. There we go. So that's for one of the speakers. So now we can take the battery out. This is also the factory battery from this laptop when I first got it over a year ago, and the battery has been flawless. No issues, and I'm still getting probably around 12 to 14 hours of battery life. And yes, I said 12 to 14 hours of battery life on this laptop. I'm not sure if it's the laptop or the fact that I'm running Linux instead of Windows, or if it's the thermal compound, because I changed it and I did notice that there was a huge battery improvement after originally changing the thermal compound. Pulling all of these connectors out and closing connectors to make sure nothing breaks off. So we have this one that we took off for the speaker. We have this one here for the trackpad, this one for the keyboard, this one backlight for the keyboard, and this one here is for the card reader. So now we can unplug the next speaker. And again, these pry up. Now we can take this black cover off. I'll do this carefully to make sure not to rip it, and try to preserve the adhesive so we can put it back on. So now we have some more connectors here. Okay, then we have this connector here, so we can pull that up. Now we have a wire here just for the display. I believe these are stuck on. So I have to kind of pry it up a little bit, but careful so not to rip the connector off. So now I'm going to try and get the fans out of the way. So it should just be these 2 screws here. We should be able to take this fan out. So that fan is coming out. And this connector right here, we can just pry that up. Now it is a good idea to clean these out while we're in here, although that is spotless. There's no dust in that at all. So that's good. Everything over here seems to be disconnected, so that should be fine. Now we just have to go back over to this side here. Let's try and get this out. Oh, there's another connector here. Yep, and now this connector right here, just pry it straight up. No dust on these at all. This computer is spotless. Kind of amazing considering I use this in the garage all the time. So now we're just going to take this wire out, which seems to go under the fan there. Making notes. 1 goes on the computer side. 2 goes on the exterior side. It's for the Wi-Fi antennas. And now we have another speaker here. 4 in total on this. There we go. I believe that should be everything. So now we can take the motherboard screws out. All seems well. Okay, that should be it. Make sure this comes out, and we are free. So that's the entire motherboard. And the RAM is integrated into the motherboard, which kind of sucks. It's not upgradable. Okay, so that's all good. So now we can just flip this over, and we can begin working on taking the heatsink off and cleaning the thermal compound. Oh, so here we have a little bit of dust. Okay, there is some. For some reason, it's only on the middle, but sure. So now we have to take these off. So we have this one right here, which is 1. Now we can pull the heatsink off, and you can see that the thermal compound is still very fluid. So the thermal compound was still working. Gonna clean off the heatsink first. I'm just gonna be using paper towel. I don't have any isopropyl alcohol right now, and I can't really get any because quarantine. So I'm just gonna make sure this is clean. And you can see nothing came off, so that is spotless. Now for the CPU. There we go. That's clean now. You can see that that is spotless. When you apply thermal compound on a regular CPU, like for a desktop, it's much different than how you apply it for a laptop or an exposed die processor. So this goes the same for GPUs. You just want to take the thermal compound until it just comes to the edge. All I'm going to do is I'm going to dab it on until the entire die surface is covered. Because unlike a CPU, if you just put it in the middle, and then you put it on and it spreads, those exposed corners won't be cooled, and that will affect performance. So you just want to make sure that the entire thing has a very, very light coat of thermal compound. Messy, but complete. So that's the thermal compound application. You can see that it's very, very thin. You still have some tiny little exposed areas, but once it actually compresses, that'll spread out nicely. That's it. This can go back on. And now we can reverse the process. We can take the new NVMe. So we're gonna get that in. Everything's good. Now, I'm not sure pretty squished in here. This might stick out, but I'm gonna try it anyway. So my desktop, which is right here, I put in 3 Gamix S11 Pros. Now, so the thing with the S11 Pro and the SX8200, they come very similar packaging. So if you examine the actual NVMe itself, the only real difference that you can see is the flash chips are actually made by ADATA itself on the Gamix S11 Pro. On this one here, the SX8200 Pro, they're made by Micron. In the specs, both read speeds are the same of up to 3,500 megabytes. However, the write speed is the only thing that really changes. So we can have a write speed up to 3,000 megabyte per second or up to 2,300 megabyte per second. From what I was finding, just with some light research, I didn't look into this a huge amount. The write speed on these was limited due to heat. So if you put a heat spreader on them, like my motherboard where it has an integrated heat spreader into the motherboard, so I didn't need the heat spreaders, you should be able to get better write speeds. There's not a lot of cross-flow air in this. However, what I'm thinking, if I'm able to get the heatsink in here on the case, the tolerance is probably going to be so tight that the bottom of the case is going to be pushing on the heatsink itself, which should dissipate heat through the actual bottom of the laptop, possibly reducing temperatures. I'm just gonna see if I can even fit one of these, because they just stick on. See if I can even put this on. Will it fit? It does actually go on. No, actually, looks like it's fitting. Here. Oh yeah, that's right up against it. That actually fits. My plan may not have been so far-fetched after all. So I was about to put this back on, and I actually just noticed that for some reason, which really makes no sense at all, there's stickers that block the vents. So you can see that they're blocking the holes. And those holes go right on the inside of the fan, so it's actually blocking right here and right here for some reason, which is really weird. So I'm actually gonna take those off, probably to reduce dust or something inside. Just in case I do end up needing them, I'm just going to put them right here. So that way they are nice and safe. So and if something bad happens, like really fast dust buildup or something, put them right back on. No problems. Those are stuck down, so we're good. We have complete open airflow. So let's just go over a quick recap here. We have the thermal compound changed with Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut. We have the NVMe changed with an ADATA XPG SX8200 with the Gamix S11 Pro heatsink on it. Everything appears to be hooked up, and we've modified the air vents on the back. So we have complete airflow all the way through. So now that front piece has to hinge down. There we go. Put these screws back in. 2 small ones for the middle, big ones for the outside, and then over on the front. The only time we had to change the screwdriver bit to the Torx 5. Now these are to only go in enough until case seats flush. So you're not supposed to tighten them all the way. They're for adjustment, to adjust the height on the bottom. So you can see right now there's a gap, or a ridge. So it hits, and as I tighten, the gap goes away, but I can tighten so much, there's a hard edge there too. Back them off until you find a nice happy medium. We can just take our little rubber foot, put this back on. Now when you're doing this, this is a little trick here because when you're taking it off, it does stretch a little bit. Put in this corner first, stick that down a little bit, and put it in this corner until it lines up, and then push it in from the middle. Because it'll bow a little bit from its stretch. So if you put it in from the middle or one side, as you're pushing and stretching it, and it'll end up being too long. So that is it. You can take our Pop! OS USB. Now I'm going to put the power on and then just mash F9 to change the boot order. Here's the first startup. There's going to take a little while because it had the battery unhooked. So the CMOS was reset, which is fine. Totally normal. Now we can go and select our USB stick. So now that we're back into the Pop! OS Live USB, let's open disks so we can run another benchmark real quick on this NVMe. So for this we need a partition, and the last partition that we were doing was ext4. So I'm going to have an ext4 partition here, so we're gonna create that. Okay, so now it's done. We don't want to mount it, we want to have it unmounted so that way we'll get a write test. Now we're gonna benchmark this partition. I'm gonna start the benchmark, start. Okay, already we have a huge improvement. So before we were hovering around 2 GB per second, we're now just over 3 GB per second. The average write that we had before was around 400 megabytes. We're at 2.2 gigabytes. And the average access latency time was 0.03, which is really fast, and this is 0.01. So let's run that benchmark again. 3.1 read, 2.1 write, 0.01 millisecond latency. Let's run that one more time. 2.9 read, 2.1 write, 0.01 millisecond. That is ridiculously fast. So let's get rid of that partition and we're good. Install Pop! OS now. English. I live in the frozen north and I use a English US keyboard. Perfect. So now what we can do is we can do a clean install. That'll just do everything for us and we're ready to go. What you noticed on that last install was that we had empty space at the beginning and the end of the drive. So that's just for parity's sake if we ever need to do data recoveries and everything. So it's safe to have, it's good for the drive. However, you lose some capacity, and I noticed that the swap was more than it needed to be. We can go to custom. We're running on battery life, which is fine, so I'm gonna ignore that. So now in here, we need to make partitions, so that way we can have all of the proper ones. So this is just something I'm doing. You can completely skip this step if you want. It's not necessary at all. For me, it just makes a cleaner install. First thing I'm gonna do here is I'm going to do root access, so sudo so now we have root access. That'll make it easier so we don't have to type in sudo every time. Let's go to lsblk, so that'll list the disks here. So right here we have NVMe 0 and 1. So that right there is going to be the drive that we want to mess with. gdisk space /dev/, and then I'm going to be typing in NVMe 0 and 1 because I want to open up gdisk on that drive. We'll just write P so we can just show that there's no partitions at all. So number, start, sector, there's nothing. Now the first thing that we want to do is we want to hit N to make a new partition. If you ever need these commands, you can just hit question mark and it'll show them all. So N is a new partition. P is print the partition table, so that'll show you what you've done so far. Q, quit. W is to write, and so on. So we're going to hit N because we want to make a new partition. We want this to be our first partition, so we'll just hit enter. The first sector, we want it to start right at the beginning of the drive, so we're just going to hit enter. The last sector, so now we want this one to be 512 megabytes, so that's going to be our EFI. And then for EFI, it's EF00. When you're using gdisk, for whatever reason, it uses FAT16, so we're going to have to format that after we're done. If you're following along with this process, so you have a cleaner install, you're going to want to make note that you're going to have to format that after, and I'll show you how to do that as well. So the next partition that we want to have is going to be our boot partition, so that needs to be roughly about 1 gigabyte. So now it's always safer to go more. For this instance, I'm just going to go with 1 gigabyte and keep it really simple. So for that one again, we're going to go N, we're going to make another partition. This is going to be partition 2, it's already ready to go. We want that to start right where the last one left off, and then for this one here, what we need to do is we need to do math, because the way this is going to work is it's whatever number you type in is going to be the actual digit for where it sits. So if we pick 1 gigabyte right now, so 1024 megabytes, it's going to deduct the 512 that we already did. So that's only going to end up being 512 megabytes. So with that taken into account, 1024 megabytes plus 512 megabytes is 1536. So that's what we're going to be making, this 1536 M. All right, and then for this file system, it's just the boot partition, so we can just leave that as ext4, or you can just enter 8300, but that is the default, so if you just hit enter, it'll just automatically pick 8300 for you. So that's the next partition. Now we need to make our swap. In the swap partition, which is essentially if the computer ever exceeds the amount of RAM that it has, it'll fall back on the swap partition, so that way you don't get ridiculous things happening and programs crashing and everything going wrong, so it's always safe to have one. The rule of thumb for most laptops is they just make them around 4 gigabytes because most laptops don't have more than 16 gigabytes of RAM, so the default is usually 4 gigabytes. However, with 8 gigabytes of RAM, you only need 3 gigabyte swap. Because this is non-upgradable, there's never really a need to ever have more than a 3 gigabyte swap for this laptop. So we're actually saving 1 gigabyte of space because the old install that I had before was just done through the clean install and I just let it do its thing right from the get-go. We're gonna hit N, we're gonna make another partition here. So this is gonna be 3, it's gonna start right when the last one left off. And now this one here, we're gonna have 3 GB. So this one's gonna be 3 GB, which is 3072. However, remember that it's going to deduct 1536 from it. So we have to add 1536 to this in order to have a 3 GB swap. So that's going to be 4008 M. And for this one here, we want 8200 for the swap. Oh, GoPro died. Okay, and then now for the very last partition, which is just going to be the entire capacity of it, we're going to do a new one. This is going to be the 4th partition. It's going to start right where the last one left off. It's going to end at the very end of the drive, so it uses all of the capacity, and it's just going to be an exFAT partition, so we'll just leave it at the default. That's it. Now we can print to verify what we've done. So now, like I was saying earlier, we have 512 megabytes here. There's a little bit lost due to formatting. And this one here is 1024, again, a little bit lost due to formatting, no big deal. And then this one here, because it's a swap, there's no format, so it's 3 GB, so that's our 3 GB swap. So right here, where are we here? Right here, where I typed in 4,608 megabytes, that is the size of our swap, but it's actually the sector on where it starts. And the last is just the entire capacity of the drive. So now we can hit W to write these changes, and then Y for yes. So now we're going to do LSBLK, and now we can see that our NVMe right here is partitioned into these 4 partitions. And now this first partition right here, make file system, so mkfs.fat, and that's going to make it FAT32, and we want it to be /dev/ and now we're going to do NVMe 0 and 1, so that's our NVMe, and we want it to be this first partition, the 512 megabyte one. So that partition is P1. So at the end here, we're just going to do P1. And there we go. So now we're going to do custom advanced. So I'm going to move this over just so you can see a little bit better. So now for this one here, we are going to make this the boot EFI. The next one, we're going to make the boot. So for this, we want to go down, we want to go to custom and /boot. Perfect, and that's going to be ext4. Now the next one here, this is our swap partition, so we're going to make that swap. And then finally, the last one here, this is root. So now we have all 4 required partitions ready to go. The first one here is our EFI, the second one is our boot, the third one is our swap, the 4th one is the entire capacity that we're going to end up using. And that's it. Now we can erase and install. We'll close terminal because we're done with that. So that's it. So now we can restart the device. Now it's putting into the account that we just set up, and we are good to go. So let's open disks just to show everything that we did here. So right here we have EFI partition, which is 512 megabytes. So then here you can see the boot partition is 1 gigabyte, which is only 14.8% full. So we have more than enough space in the boot partition for updates, kernel updates, everything. A swap, obviously it's not being used right now, so that's 3 gigabytes just ready to go. And then we have our 500 gigabyte partition right here, which is all of our capacity. And even with the entire operating system installed, we are only using 3.1% of this. So that is that. So we have been idling right around like 35-ish degrees. Went up a little bit there because I just started OES. So I have this ready to go so we can run the Geekbench benchmark. This, Control-Shift-C, open Firefox. Okay, and we already have a notable improvement. Now before that CPU temperature gets down, let's run this test again. Alright, second test is completed. And again, notable improvement. Okay, now before this cools off again, let's run it one last time. Okay, there we go. So the last one is done. And again, notable improvement. So you can see here that the 3 tests that we did before, not only is it a notable improvement, but it's also more consistent. So if we do equals our average of 642, and then if we take the next ones equals 2028. Now if we take the new ones, which is 707 is our average there. Lastly, we have 2,357. So now if we take that number there and then subtract 2028, 329 better. So that would be 16%. So it's a 16% improvement. Now if we do the single core scores, 65 points more, that is a 10% improvement. that's really not that bad, considering this thing is just a mobile grade 8th gen i5 with integrated graphics and 8 gigs of RAM. So we ended up seeing a huge improvement on this. And even that idle temperature while running OBS is at 50 degrees, 49. So this was without question an overall success. So a few more things here before these updates finish. This laptop right out of the box, everything works. So we have volume, everything works, brightness works, the keyboard backlight, we can turn that on and off if we want. Even the privacy screen works. So if we want privacy when we're doing whatever, you can actually just turn that so then no one can see what you're doing. And it even knows that when you flip the laptop over, the lights turn off on the keyboard. It knows the orientation, and it even works sideways. All right, all the updates are done and everything's ready to go. So feel free to subscribe if you haven't already, like the video if you liked it, or don't. I'm not telling you what to do.